Good evening, beloved. We have been working to create the documents of Godland as we have expanded and the monarchy of Godland has turned into diarchy. And today I'm so pleased to announce that we have managed to create the contract, the manifest of unity of diarchs of Godland. So, Leif of Godland and me, Ditta of Godland, we have signed and even with our blood approved this unity. Because our precious state of global proportions, with the aim of restoring indigenous world order, lies on very lawful grounds, and we do include all other citizen states, all almost 200 states that are known on the world, into our Godland, to support them in their work of establishing rights for indigenous people of the world. And I will ask Leif of Godland to read the manifest of unity of diarchs of Godland for you. And say hey.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello. Godland, Manifest of Unity of Diarchs of Godland. We, the Diarchs of Godland, Ditta and Leif of Godland, hereby manifest our unity to reach the goal of re-establishing the divine indigenous world order. The Diarchy of Godland is a society of equals in the sense that each ethnical group and race is supported to exercise their birthrights and rule their own social economical systems, and just distribution of resources in historical areas. Ditta and Leif of Godland represent Godland either together or separately. Succession order goes to worthy scholars from Baltic Sea area. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we full-heartedly support the current national states to free themselves from foreign irresponsible rule of hidden structures that are not loyal to their indigenous peoples and citizens. Godland is a global state of indigenous world order that includes all existing citizen states to melt the murderous war economy conglomerate called the New World Order. Godland proclaims indigenous decentralization of all corporations and delivers restitution or introduction of citizen state systems that are loyal to local indigenous people. We define citizen state as a geographically bound society of profit-sharing citizens protected in all parameters of Baltic Sun model. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that to dismantle genocidal New World Order, we full-heartedly implement the declarations on the rights of indigenous peoples and Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, protect all races and all ethnogenetic groups by establishing an order where each group is supported to nourish its members, decentrifuging the global race-mixing experiment that is destroying the divine order of geographical basis of the indigenous. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we invoke indigenous decentralization of all corporations involved in hyper-genocidal vaccination business. Neither forced nor uninformed consent vaccinations of any kind are allowed. We nullify any contracts for vaccinating people on their fertility organs, as this is leading to total loss of next generation and is to be classified as internal chemical warfare. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare the cessation of all nuclear war systems. The Diarchs of Godland, Ditta Konna of Godland, Ditta Reitema, Leif Kon of Godland, Leif Erlingsson. In Jordbro, Sweden, by Baltic Sea, the 11th June 12,017.
Thanks so much. Complicated English, isn't it?
Yes.
But we will get used to it. It will get better. Our tongues will be exercised quite soon. Thanks so much for bringing this forward. And this was the first document that we created today, finalized rather, and two more law documents we have created. One of them is Declaration of Godland, ending genocidal occupation of the lands of indigenous peoples of Earth by hidden entities through laws enforced without consent. And the second is Charter of Godland, restitution of the world indigenous order with tally sticks OXA. And OXA is a new word that we have created, and that means bill of exchange that is not debt. Creating bills of exchange that are just means of exchange, some type of indigenous basic income. And that is where really the new era of freeholders begins and the era of slavery ends. And so the Charter of Godland, restitution of the world indigenous order with tally stick OXA as money and basic indigenous income for all loyals to indigenous. And I will ask you to read up the Declaration of Godland, and I will later read the Charter of Godland, so that, because there will be more explanation necessary. Here you are.
Thank you.
Do you like some water?
Declaration of Godland ends genocidal occupations of the lands of indigenous peoples of Earth by hidden entities through laws enforced without consent. We, Leif and Ditta of Godland solemnly declare the following matters. Whereas to us it is apparent that well-organized individuals in key positions inside any corporate government administration, any corporate media, and in any country's political and religious corporate establishment are hard at work for the purpose of completely or partially exterminating the indigenous people of any ethnic group or race, deliberately creating infertility and imposing migration and mix of ethnical and racial groups. Whereas we have lived in the decades of invisible colonizers that through networks of war economy corporations part all societies into pieces and put all pieces into war with each other, while degrading environment and health of all living systems. Earth has been turned into a prison planet with automated, digitally suicidal systems that may seem unstoppable. Whereas the Baltic Sea region, as most of other regions of the world, is forced to live in systemic war conditions, and the flow of refugees of indigenous people of Baltic Sea region is made invisible in media to replace indigenous of Baltic Sea with other races and ethnical groups. Whether or not there is war always depends on what we, the people, do. Among us there are few who see the light in the end of the tunnel, and those men and women stand up and now proclaim indigenous decentralization of all corporate structures established through fraud by invisible rulers. For the last 999 years, invisible hierarchical agents of church and state have decided the fashion of our destiny, beslaving and murdering our tribes and races through religions, governments, and corporations, funding both sides of every issue, every ideology, and each war. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we full-heartedly support the current national states to free themselves from foreign irresponsible rule of hidden structures that are not approved by their nation to be fully loyal to their indigenous peoples and citizens. Godland is a global state of indigenous world order that includes all existing citizen states to melt the murderer's new world order. Godland proclaims indigenous decentralization of all corporations delivering restitution or introduction of citizen state systems that are loyal to local indigenous people. We define citizen state as a geographically bound society of profits-sharing citizens and their societies with their human rights protected in all parameters of Baltic Sun model. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that to dismantle genocidal New World Order, we full-heartedly implement the declarations on the rights of indigenous peoples and Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We protect all races and all ethnogenetic groups by establishing an order where each group is supported to nourish its members, decentrifuging the global race mixing experiment that is destroying the divine order of indigenous geographical bases. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we invoke indigenous decentralization of all corporations involved in fertility-reducing programs, as for example, hyper-genocidal vaccination business. We nullify any contract for vaccinating people on their fertility organs, as this is leading to total loss of next generation and is to be classified as internal chemical warfare. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we stop any orders, decrees and laws supporting chemtrails. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we stop any orders, decrees and laws supporting child abduction by state and country corporations. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we stop any orders, decrees and laws supporting financial warfare of stock markets and other instruments of digitalized mass destruction. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we invoke indigenous decentralization on any and all corporations involved in war economy and nuclear power. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we nullify all contracts that hinder to establish right of all peoples established in the Baltic Sun model. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we invoke indigenous decentralization on any and all corporate charters of all business corporations involved in psychological warfare through religion. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly declare that we invoke indigenous decentralization on any and all corporate charters of all business corporations pretending to be governments of peoples of all 200 states of the world, such as Switzerland, Austria, Vatican, China, Japan, City of London, Russia, Israel, District of Columbia, the United States federal government, United States of America, state of, etc., business corporation, United Nations, registered in New York, inclusive of any and all abbreviations, idem sonans, or other legal, financial, or managerial forms, any and all international equivalents, inclusive of any and all offices, inclusive of any and all officers, public servants, executive orders, treaties, constitutions, membership, acts, and any and all other contracts and agreements made thereunder and thereby are now void, worthless, or otherwise cancelled, unrebutted, quote, bank court charters cancelled, refer True Bill, Washington DC, UCC doc number 2012-11-47-76, October 24, 2012. Current digital US SWIFT, Russian ATM and Chinese chips are proclaimed as foreign fraud and means of war. And there the first part ends.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So what we used here is also described in the appendix later, and that was declaration of facts that was taken by One People's Public Trust, specifically for foreclosure of world corporations operating under the guise of people's governments, banks and all other corporations for cause of treason against and the damage of the one people of this planet without their knowing, willing and intentional consent. And this declaration was taken already 2012.
Yes.
Which means that already for 5 years these corporations and banks have been already declared illegitimate in a lawful way, and we are just using this document to support its weight and to give it a powerful future. And so by this declaration of Godland that you just read, all the corporations of governments that are not run and employed by the people and the men and the women actually through their societies, and who are not paid by those men and women, and the banks that are corporate and are not owned and managed by the very men and women, all of these corporations have been declared illegitimate, and they have to go through indigenous decentralization. We don't shut them down right forward, because we need a lovely, smooth and loving transition without any victims, and everybody will get a better life in this society order of Godland, of indigenous world order. So, but what are the means? How will we live then? What will we turn to? It is so that we have only 3 months left here in Baltic Sea region before Aurora military exercises that they call will come here into Baltic Sea region in full power, with, as we see it, the Third World War plans to unfold here. And of course we know that that is the plan of splitting Russia into several pieces, and that is what this all is about: scaremongering and taking over all the important structures of each country. Furthermore, what we know is that almost all children older than 12 years in Baltic Sea regional schools have been vaccinated on their reproductive organs. And that is through an informed consent, as they get raw lies about what these vaccines do. And through that, the next generation is totally vaporized as ovaries and testicles shrink and stop developing into fertility, producing capacities. And that is a genocidal war crime through biological weapons, which has to stop tomorrow. That's why we are so on to the point in our declaration and manifest and charter about this importance of because that is raw warfare within the bodies of our children. And that is, so we have very little time. We have to stop these monstrous systems now, the closest days and months. And the method through which each one of you can do this is described in the Charter of Godland. Restitution of the World Indigenous Order with tallies tick oxa, bill of exchange that is no debt, as money, and basic indigenous income for all loyals. We, Ditta and Leif of Godland, solemnly restitute following matters. World of indigenous runes tallies tick oxa as indigenous money. And I have to look if I have it with me. I might have. No, I don't. Anyway, you can. I did show the tally stick before in the previous session that we started this day with yesterday, and you can see it in another video that will be called Introduction. 10th of June 2017. And I will just describe for you who won't find that. The tally stick is made out of a piece of branch of wood that is split into two parts and cut into a convenient length. And on the middle part that is uneven, you write the number of your oxa, of the amount of money that you are emitting yourself or your family member that you entrust to do this task. And on the outside of the tally stick, two sides. So here, when you split it, in the inside you write the numbers of the oxa that you have emitted, the amount of money. But here on the outside, you write the parts of transaction, their initials, and you write the accounting number. But what we now decided on is that you even write here on the outside the date of creation of the money. And furthermore, you need a seal of your own kin or tribe, however you will organize this accounting of oxes. And the date is important because we don't want to get inflation, and these tally sticks will be losing their value with time. And more information on this you will be able to find on webpage loveorder.info. And here in the document of charter, we proclaim that we support local communities to start using widely world indigenous runes. That is how we suggest to call these oxa money means. And word oxa is our invention because it is not a loan. It is a money that we create ourselves. So we end the times of slavery for corporations by starting to protect our right to create our means of exchange ourselves without them being a debt. But we do put frames for how much you can emit every month, and depending on your age as well. And then of course you will get added income depending on what work you do for your family and society. But even the work in the family will be giving rewards in oxa. So the families will be at last flourishing, and young people we will protect as well. So people who start families will not have to work for any corporations at all. You will be working to create family, flourishing environment for your children, because that is the most divine work, creation of next generation, and having time and energy to create loving environment in your family nest, and to have time for relations with your kin and relatives, so that the ethnogenetical powers can again exist in non-stressful environments and flourish. And so we come into the time of abundance. And so we have put on foreclosure the current digital US SWIFT, Russian ATM and Chinese chips systems, and all other digital weaponry that has been put upon us without our consent and without us accepting this horrifying and stressful weapon of mass destruction. Because if the electricity goes, or some of the big guys decide that, oh, those people, they shouldn't have money and others would, so they just put other numbers in their digital banking files, and discrimination and racism is a fact through these systems, and that stops with this World Indigenous Rune Oxas. And so these current digital SWIFT and ATM and chips are proclaimed as foreign fraud and means of war that has to be carefully and in safe stages overtaken by local indigenous peoples with oxa systems that wouldn't ever be damaged by any digital disturbances, because that is reliable form of means of exchange. As you have trees and bushes everywhere, and you can produce the money. Of course, there are other ways too to do oxa. It doesn't have to be always in wood. It can be a decent form of document that you just create and put in your signatures on it, and keeping the accountants with chiefs of indigenous people, so that we have reliable people who don't betray us as the network of indigenous have been tested through thousands of years, and their culture is a culture of truth and holy, divine connection to the forces of high spirituality that protect all living systems. And for these purposes, we have created Baltic Indigenous Bank, and we established Baltic Indigenous Bank to arrange the just flow of distribution of resources by OXA systems to all men and women of indigenous world order and their loyals. And we support local communities, even to introduce indigenous basic income, and testing various settings of levels of income that would be basic, without any work, just free every month, to fit local culture and harmony, and to compare the results transparently as this unfolds, so that we can see how much, which levels work the best. So we don't emit too much, and we don't emit too little of resources for each one of us. And this is a new era, and find people you trust, indigenous people, and you have to create these communities. We can only support and give you basic frame of methodology, and we can fight for this development to evolve. We will be the faces that will claim the right to live in indigenous world order. We will be the faces who will claim for the hidden rulers to approach us. And no more will we accept that hidden societies with no responsibility onto them will rule our lands and our souls, and will massacre our children, and will steal them from us into hostile education structures that create them to slaves of foreign corporations who work for war economies. No more. So we intend to develop and update this first declaration of Godland constantly, and please write to us so that we can use even your competencies. And please find the Baltic Sun model on the webpage nationalstate.info, so you can see all the 14 parameters of the basic matrix of all of your rights. This is the end of slavery. This is the beginning of redistribution of the resources. This is the time of love, peace, and understanding that we give to you. But it's up to us all to materialize it, because we are the loving diarchs, and we will be here for us all as long as we can. And please protect us as heartfully as we will protect you. So, let it be so. And I'll show you just the final part of this document, where we have signed with our blood, sealed on these words, and together we stand. Let it be so.
Let it be so.
Thanks so much. It has been a pleasure. This weekend was fabulous to work with you together. And thanks so much that you came such a long way.
Thank you.
And we will be, with the help of the high forces, creating re-establishment of indigenous world order of Godland.
Yes.